on this computer. And I'm just going to wait. Fab. So, good morning, everyone. It is 18th of September.
Oh, you're running?
2020. We are indeed, Steve. We're live on Facebook. Oh, I've lost you there, Steve. Hello, Steve. Can you hear us?
Hi, yeah, I can.
Fab.
Can you hear me still?
I can still hear you. You're out and about in a wonderful place. I have absolutely no idea where you're at, but it looks absolutely gorgeous. The sun seems to be shining, so you're clearly in the right part of the world. And you seem to have found yourself a nice spot to sit down in.
Absolutely. I found a lovely spot in the Morning Sunshine Lake District. So Kath and I are having a bit of a mid-break, and we're going home this evening. Well, going home today very reluctantly, out and come midweek, and we just had beautiful, gorgeous. And we're on a little campsite in Langdale near Loughrig Tarn. I don't know if anybody knows the area, but it is breathtakingly beautiful. And this campsite is our favourite one. It's the one we come to when we want a bit of peace and quiet. So if I wander off and just sit there with a big silly grin on my face, you know, that's why.
Well, I just think...
So, yeah, good morning, everybody. Welcome.
I think bearing in mind how unstable the connection can be in the lakes, Steve, if I could just suggest that you just sit there for 45 minutes an hour and just enjoy this conversation, because I'm mindful that you might start wondering, and whilst it might be a lovely walk for you, we might lose connectivity. And I can't, you know, who was it? Oh, bless, what's his name? Tony Cook, our good friend Tony Cook, always calls this the Jaffer and Steve show. And well, if Steve disappears, well, then it becomes a Jaff show. And really, I don't know if you want that, Steve. I really don't know if you just want this to be the Jaff show, because...
Well, I wouldn't mind, actually, because I could just sit here and take the mickey.
Well, you do that anyway, Steve. You do that anyway, but...
A little bit. Anyway, it's lovely to be here, and it's lovely to be with you and to spend time with these lovely folk.
Well, when you told me yesterday, you said you're off on a campsite, I got a little bit worried. I was thinking, oh my gosh, we might not be able to do an episode, and I know we're slightly late, so apologies about that. But hey ho, technology is always in our favor when it comes to this kind of stuff. But yeah, when you told me yesterday, I thought, oh no, we don't want to give the good folks a chance to miss out. So I am glad that we've managed to make it work. And yeah, and we're gonna start things a little differently this week, aren't we, Steve?
We are.
So you were saying, you know what, Steve, now that I think about it, and I'm just doing this off the hoof, I'm just mindful that perhaps you don't have the story to hand any longer.
No, I do.
Oh, you do? Okay. Well, I was just thinking you're sitting in such a lovely, lovely place where you are right now, and whether you could take us through a guided relaxation this morning. I know I was going to do the starter, but it just seems like such a fabulous place where you're sat in, and I'm just thinking, especially if you can hear the birds tweeting in the background and all that kind of stuff, it'd be great. If you want me to do it, I'll do it.
No, you do it, Jeff.
Fab.
You've prepared something, and it sounded great, so you do that.
Fab. Yeah. So me and Steve have decided to just mix things up a little bit this week, just because we can. So what I'll do is I'll be doing the starter, and then Steve will be reading us a lovely, lovely story, and then we'll get into today's content. So what I'd like to take us through this morning is a nice guided relaxation. So just get yourself comfortable in whatever seat you might be sat in. And if you're stood up and pottering around, if you're stood up perhaps at work or anywhere else, then just perhaps grab the closest seat to yourself and just sit down and begin to relax. That's right. And you can perhaps feel the floor beneath your feet, or any other surface that you might have your feet on. And you can feel the seat that you're sat in. And as you can begin to feel the feeling of that seat, that just allows you to relax a little bit more deeper. That's right. And you can perhaps hear my voice and the birds tweeting in Steve's background and any other noise that you might hear around you. And use all of these noises, allow all of these noises to allow you to relax just that little bit more deeper. And now, think of a time in your past that provided you with such an intense positive experience. You might be recalling and remembering feelings of joy and happiness, content and calmness, peace, serenity, excitement, all of those positive feelings that you once experienced. And as you relive this memory, you can begin to become aware of what you can see and hear around you. And so all of the things that you can see around you, all of those things that give you this amazing feeling, this wonderful warm feeling, just make the colours in those pictures bright, vibrant and bold. And if there's any sound in that memory, then imagine you have a remote control in your hand and you can turn up the sound, making it as loud and as vibrant as it needs to be so that you can re-access all those feelings all at the same time. And as you really begin to reassociate into this wonderful memory, this memory of when you felt absolutely great, fantastic, then just allow yourself to sit there with those feelings and that memory. And perhaps you want to access this memory more frequently, more regularly, especially in the current times that we live in. So in whatever way works for you, identify a way physically that you can recall this memory. And as you sit there and you allow those feelings to wash over you, you can remember that those feelings can be accessed at will, as can the memory. And when you're ready, you can begin to join us back on this podcast. And perhaps if you'd had your eyes closed throughout that whole process, you can begin to open them and notice two lovely faces on your screen smiling at you. So that was just something I threw together, Steve. I think we both have our specialisms, and I know mine isn't necessarily starters. I'm getting better at them,
That was
and at
lovely.
the same
I
time,
really enjoyed that.
it's something that I'm not very confident at, should I say?
Mm.
But story time, straight over to the story, which when I read it last night, it just brought me so much joy. You know, when we're talking about feelings of joy and happiness, it brought me so much joy. So over to you, Steve.
Well, this is a story. It's a little bit about time, which we were going to talk about
Yep.
anyway. But it's also about communication. And it's about this couple that had a really tempestuous relationship. So they were always arguing and everything was kind of front and center. And when they argued, they would argue with passion. And afterwards, often what they would do is they just would ignore each other and give each other the silent treatment for 2 or 3 days afterwards. So one day they were having this argument and it was really intense and it lasted all day right up until bedtime when they'd exhausted themselves and the silent treatment started. So the guy was okay with this. He was used to this. It was part of their pattern of being together, except for one thing. he had an important flight to catch and needed to be up at 4:30 in the morning. He was a heavy sleeper, and he relied on his partner, who wasn't a heavy sleeper, to wake him up. Now that's going to be a problem because they're not talking to each other. But while his partner was getting ready for bed, he wrote a little note and put it on his partner's pillow. And the note said, "Important flight to catch in the morning. Could you wake me up at 4:30? Settled down, went to sleep, woke up, looked at the alarm clock, 8 o'clock. He was furious. His partner had already got up, was no longer in the room, was furious and ready to restart the argument, but much more intensely. Until he noticed a little note on his bedside table. And the note said, "It's 4:30. It's time to get up."
Oh my gosh. Well, yeah. There's so much to be said about that one story alone. So much to be said about that one story alone.
I'd never read that before. I found it yesterday on a web page, and I thought, "Oh, that might fit."
Yes. Yeah. And I know we're going to talk about time. And for those of you that remember, when Steve was on his wonderful holiday a few weeks ago, we had the lovely co-host Sarah Bishop, and me and Sarah talked about time, and me and Steve thought, well, why not? You know, because you're on a journey, Steve, and journeys involve time, and so we started talking. We thought, well, let's revisit time, my good old friend time. You know, I love that subject. But before we do, the one thing that when I read that story. And again, there's the presupposition of NLP, these statements of intent. And one of them is the meaning of your communication is a response you get.
Yeah.
And I think that story sums it up so perfectly.
Yeah.
If you're going to communicate with someone, sending them a post-it note, not apologizing or not necessarily putting to bed what had happened, literally and figuratively, and if you're just going to send them a note going, please can you wake me up at 4:30? Well, the response you're going to get is whatever meaning you decided to start that conversation off with. I just thought wonderful, wonderful, wonderful story. And it really made me chuckle when I read it last night. I just thought, great, this is
Well, it made
perfect.
me chuckle as well.
This is perfect.
Yeah.
So you're on a journey, Steve. So how long did it take you to get up to wherever you are?
Well, from Blackpool, I mean, it's great. And we came up after work earlier in the week. So the roads were quiet. And it was only an hour and a quarter, an hour and 20 minutes. It was great.
Oh, fab.
Fab. Yeah. And we ended up in a beautiful spot. So, yeah. But, yeah, we were talking yesterday about how time changes and the idea of how time can condense or stretch out a little bit. And one of the things that we were talking about was how on journeys that might happen. Was it Einstein, when he was looking at relativity, said that the faster you go, is it that time slows down or time speeds up? But anyway, but actual physical time measured on a clock, if you can call it physical time, I don't know if you can call it. But that's an interesting one, isn't it? So for those of you that have done perhaps the master practitioner or familiar with meta programs, not meta programs, the meta model. So it's not master practitioner. It's practitioner course, isn't it? So the meta model, when we use time as if it's something like I just did, as if it's something that can be, measured or weighed, then I hadn't thought of time as a nominalization before, but it is, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's something that we feel that we can kind of parcel up and hold, or it acquires sort of physical properties in our minds, but that it doesn't actually possess. Do you often get confused when people say they're going to make time for something?
Yeah.
And if I'm working one-to-one with somebody, what I've started to do is to challenge that statement, because it actually makes no sense. You don't make time. You just choose how you use the time you've got. And I've started doing that to myself as well, and it makes a whole lot more sense, because then it doesn't become a question of doing something that I can't do, so setting myself up to fail, but it becomes a question of prioritizing,
Mm.
which I can control. Yeah.
And
I'm
that thing.
rambling, aren't I?
Well, I was just gonna. You're not, Steve. I think the thing about nominalization. So we discussed this last week. For folk who haven't managed to check out last week's podcast, please do. I apologies. I uploaded it slightly late, so it might be on. It might be. You might just need to catch it on catch up. Apologies, Steve. But I was just going to say we discussed nominalizations last week. So
Mm,
actually, last week we were talking about communication. This week we talk about time. The same thing applies in that you can't put it in a wheelbarrow. So that's my. Whenever I find I come across a word and I think, can
yeah,
I put it in a wheelbarrow? And time,
the
well, you
wheelbarrow thing.
can't.
Yeah,
You could put a clock in a wheelbarrow. That's very different to time, because a
yeah,
clock
yeah.
tells the time, or
So maybe
supposedly
that's
tells
what
the time.
Einstein was talking about. Maybe the clock, it was, wasn't it? It was the clocks that speed up or slow down the faster you go.
Right.
And as
Okay.
you,
Yeah.
yeah, and as you get close to the speed of light or something, if you're traveling at the speed of
Wow.
light, the clock stops. Wow.
And that I don't know how you'd ever kind of work that out. I'm just gonna look for some, Steve, whilst you're on in the background, because that thing about what you said before, I think you just said it just now about what is time, and I remember seeing this wonderful quote. That was just, yeah, it was amazing. That just kind of put it into perspective, that actually it's a man-made construction in many ways, isn't it? It's something that we needed it to make sense as time went along. We needed it to make sense of what was going on. But yeah, it's actually, it's very man-made, and actually in different parts of the world time is viewed very, very differently. So,
Mm,
for example, in the summer months, when I go to Pakistan, it's incredible, because people get up at 7 o'clock in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever it might be, sometimes even earlier, work through to midday. By which point the sun is just so blaringly hot that you just
yeah, yeah,
cannot do anything. And then they take a mid-afternoon nap until 4, and then wake back up at 4 and continue going about the day's work as though they hadn't had that nap in between. And the first time I kind of came across this, I was like, what the bloody hell's going on here then? What is going on here? Um, and so,
they don't do that in Blackburn then.
well, they don't do a lot of things in Blackburn, if I'm being honest at the minute, Steve. This is a chance for you to make a good old lockdown joke. Go on, Steve. I know you want to.
No, it's not a lockdown joke. It's just the fact that the sun never shines in Blackburn, so you never have that problem.
Which, in all fairness, we have had quite a bit of sun this
I
week,
know,
so
I know.
that's
But it's
a good thing.
interesting. Sorry, I interrupted you. We're talking about time and how it's seen in Pakistan.
Well, yes, I was just going to say it's a it is for many people a man. Well, not for many people, factually, it's a man-made construct, and for us in the Western world, actually, we need it as we move through into the Industrial Revolution and parts of our history. We just need to get a better understanding of actually, when do we go to work, when do we go to sleep, all that kind of stuff. And we're fast approaching the end of October. I know it's only the middle of September now, but we're fast approaching that time of year when the clocks go back and the clocks go forward,
Yeah,
which always confuses me.
yeah, it
Always
does me as
confuses me.
well. What happens to that hour? Where do you get
Yeah,
the hour from?
where do you get the hour from?
Yeah, but yeah, I suppose time has always been important ever
Mm,
since ever since humans have arrived on the planet.
yeah,
Just in the sense, so think about it in terms of the first farmers, whether they be sort of nomads who um, had to move flocks around to keep them healthy, to move them on so they got the right food. And so the idea of a north and south
yeah,
migration,
yeah,
north in the summer, south in the winter, um, perhaps following the bird migration, and also for when the first people settled down and started
mm,
growing crops, that idea of, well, when's the best time to sow and plant and harvest our crops?
yeah.
Um, And I guess I think one of the ideas behind Stonehenge is that it's an early clock. So it tells you on an annual basis when it's time to do those things
Yes. Yeah.
by measuring the angle of the sun. I heard once as well that, you were mentioning the Industrial Revolution and how people had to be aware of time in order to be at the factory, in order to get their shifts. But I remember reading somewhere once, I don't know if this is true or not, but there weren't any clocks around until railways were invented. Once railways were invented, first two things happened. First of all, people needed to know when trains were coming and going in order to get on them. And the second one I can't remember. But anyway, yeah. So people suddenly needed to know the time in order to take advantage of the mobility that was available to them. Of course, in NLP, we're not so much interested on where time comes from or goes to, or even how we measure it in a way. I suppose it's more about how we experience it and how we use time to kind of codify what's happening in our lives.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Which kind of brings us back to that idea of in time, through time concept, where we can experience our lives and the time that we have in either of those ways or both of those ways.
And just before we go into that, Steve, that bit that you said just before the kind of bringing it back to NLP, so how time was kind of properly invented in the way that we see it currently, and the mention of railways and kind of people getting to well, catching the train really. So part of me just then when you were saying that triggered in me. So in NLP, we talk about, as you rightly said, there in time and through time, and there's a really good difference which we'll talk about in a minute. But back then, did people have these preferences as well? And I'm guessing so. And it'd just be really interesting to kind of, see where, if we could go into the past, and so a through timer. A through timer, and this is just this is just in Jaff's world. So anyone watching out there, you might be going, I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, but just see it through. And if you have anything else that you'd like to add, please do feel free to contribute either through the chat or comments on YouTube. But as someone who's got quite a strong through time preference, and through time as you see the past, the present, and the future, or little bits of the past, present, and future at kind of all times. If I knew that the very first train was leaving at, let's say, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, well, Jaff would probably be there at 3:30. But because we've already started to come across this so because NLP is relatively new in that it was formed in the 1970s, so we're going back through other episodes in that me and you have had, so we discussed in an earlier episode that NLP was formed around the 1970s. But for me, NLP is based on the basis of what people do naturally well.
Do you know, you've just that question that you asked a few minutes ago is really kind of resonating with me, because that idea of if people didn't have clocks or a sort of a detailed awareness of time, then could they do through time or in time? That's an interesting question.
And if they did, how did they? So if they did have that awareness, because I'm just thinking, supposedly, perhaps people did. How did they differentiate? So how did so yeah. So for me, it's, or is it as a result of time being invented in the way that we see it? So i.e. the clocks. When we're talking about time, we're talking about here man-made clocks and whatnot. Is it as a result of that people have gone, actually, you know what? I just prefer to live in the moment. I just really, really love to live in the moment. And actually, those of us who have got quite a strong through time preference go, well, yeah, living in the moment's great, but actually you need to learn from your past, and you also need to think about your future. And so it's great to have that spectrum of all three. Perhaps we're ending up down a rabbit hole here, Steve, because one of the things is we perhaps will never know unless we did some really detailed research.
Well, have a think about this then, because while you've been thinking, you probably heard of the gears in my brain. But if you think about those early settlers, those early farmers, as they were kind of migrating and populating the world and learning how to communicate, most of their life will be dedicated to survival. So it'd be about one crisis followed by another, by another, fight, flight, freeze, all that stuff. What's happening in front of them? That idea that it's very in NLP terms, very in time. Just surviving might be a very in time thing to do. Which it makes perfect sense, doesn't it? So what are we going to eat today? We need to go out hunting now in order to, or we need to tend to our crops now so that we've got something to eat today. But maybe, I don't know, maybe that's why people started telling stories, to shift from in time to through time. So stories about, do you remember when? And do you remember when all the leaves started falling off the trees, and then after that it got really cold? Well, the leaves have started falling off the tree, so maybe we need to move somewhere warmer.
Okay, yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Which is, so kind of using perhaps the idea of storytelling, and this is a complete leap of my imagination. But the idea of using storytelling as a way of shifting people from that in-time day-to-day survival to a more through-time thing about, okay, today we've survived, but we need to think about how we're going to survive next year. And in order to do that, like you were saying that just then, we need to remember and recall the lessons of the past. So the way we do that is through stories and that whole thing of the oral tradition and song as well, I suppose. I don't know. I'm so far down a rabbit hole. You're gonna have to send me a rope.
Well, it's just incredibly interesting, isn't it? Because at this minute in time, so let's bring it. Apologies, Steve. There's something wrong with my nose today, which seems to be giving me all the sniffles and stuff. But anyway, so let's just bring it full circle and let's talk about present time. And presently, we're aware. So myself and the good old Sarah Bishop talked about this in quite some detail, and it'd be lovely to have the same conversation with you too, Steve. About actually, as folk, we have a preference. And it's really important to state that it's a preference, and I believe it's quite contextual. So it depends on where you're at for how we view time. And so we have the through timers, or those with a really strong with a through time preference, strong or not so strong, and we have the in timers. Now, through timers are typically people who will arrive at something pretty early or quite early,
like you do,
like I do. So. I'm just going to tell this story. So I was going to help out at one of Steve's courses a few weeks ago, and being someone with a really strong through time preference, I rang Steve. I was meant to be at the house, I think, for about 8:30, if I remember correctly, because of course we were going to head over to the course at 9, and I rang Steve at so Blackburn to Blackpool. So Blackburn to Blackpool, where Steve is, in my head, was a lot longer than what it actually is, and this again is a typical trait of someone who has a through time preferences. They typically tend to plan out their journeys and add on a bit more time for kind of any eventualities that might happen, because they look into the past. They go, I remember the time the M6 was chock-a-block and I couldn't get up to Blackpool in half an hour. It took me an hour and a half because there was back-to-back and bumper-to-bumper cars and all that kind of stuff. So they look in the past, they look to the future. So someone with quite a strong through time preference, and go, and what other stuff could happen that I'm not aware of? So weather could absolutely chuck it down on a day from Blackburn to Blackpool and all that kind of stuff. And so they typically give themselves, or they frame it that I need a lot longer than what you probably would typically need. So I set off from home, giving myself an hour, forgetting that it was a Saturday morning in the beginning of September, if I remember correctly, Steve. So the weather was pretty fine. And on a really, really good day, you can get from Blackburn to Blackpool in 25 minutes. So completely forgetting all of that I'm planning on all the eventualities that I'd had. I rang Steve at 7:30 in the morning to go, Steve, I've just realised I'm going to be at your house for 8 o'clock. Do you want to tell them what you thought when you heard the phone ringing?
I don't think I'm allowed to. Yeah, you honestly, you could have walked. You could have walked in the time that you gave yourself. Never mind the motorways. But it was funny. I think I said something along the lines of, well, if you turn up at our house before 8 o'clock, then just keep on driving because I need to get a shower. I need to get. You got me out of bed, you miserable git. Look at this face. It needs beauty.
It was. Well, I put it into my TomTom thinking it's going to say 40, 45 minutes. I thought, well, I'll get there for 8:15 by that point, you know. Yeah, no, it said 7:30. By 7:55, you will be at Steve's door. And I thought, wow. Yeah, that I think I should just let them know that that this is going to happen. But you know, that's someone with quite a strong through time preference. They think about all of these things, which makes it great for future planning, fabulous for future planning. It makes it less great when you're perhaps thinking about the past, and in particular some of those more challenging times in your past, because people with a really strong through time preference can hold on to that. So bless her, my ex-wife had a really strong through time preference. I missed her birthday, and 4 years into our marriage, she kept reminding me that I missed her birthday. Now, fair enough, it was quite a big deal,
Yes.
but for her, in my head that was 2 years ago. But in her head, it was almost as though it happened yesterday. So it's really kind of really strong feelings and emotions attached to that. Whereas an in-timer, Steve, if you can just take us through someone who's perhaps got a really an in-time preference, strong or not so strong.
Well, it's the here and now, isn't it?
Mm.
I think it's a very associated place to be because what's happening, what you're experiencing here and now through your own five senses is the most important thing that's happening.
Mm.
It's not imagining what might happen from a dissociated point of view, perhaps in the future or from the past. It's about what's in front of me now. It's a very creative place, I think. It's a place where when I do in time, it's usually because I'm working really well or I'm really enjoying myself. It has many advantages. So if you want to really enjoy a meal, don't be thinking about the next one.
Yeah.
Be enjoying this one, you know? Or you want to be enjoying somebody's company, then yeah, do that rather than planning what you're doing tomorrow or remembering stuff that happened today. Yeah. So for me, it can be a very creative place, but it's also a place where obviously the downsides of that is that because you're very associated, that you lose that broader perspective of what's happening around you. Yeah, so you kind of miss out on some stuff that's going around, which is a shame. And obviously the ideal thing is that we do both.
Yeah.
And we kind of learn how to contextualize how we experience time so that we know that there's a time to do that in time stuff and a time to do that through time stuff. And I think we just do that automatically. And we kind of recognize its strengths and weaknesses.
Yeah.
Bearing in mind, as you said, that most of us do have some kind of preference. And when we were talking about this yesterday, I don't know if this is the time to bring it up, but we were thinking about it when Jaffer and I were talking about it, we were thinking about it in terms of how the COVID crisis has been managed by our politicians and our decision makers, and how we kind of notice certain traits. Now, we're saying this not. Should we talk about this, Jaff?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it.
We're not trying to make any party political comment here. We're just we've been observing how people like, chief scientific officers, heads of Public Health England, Scotland, wherever, the different political leaders have been sorting out the crisis for us. And one of the things that seems to be a theme is that there doesn't seem to be a lot of consistency. That decisions made this week change next week, and that makes people feel unsettled or uncertain about what's happening in the future. And we were thinking about it yesterday, Jaffer and I, from this point of view of in time, through time. So we were thinking about it, well, okay, so the way that the COVID pandemic has been framed is as a crisis. And in a crisis, what people tend to do is very in time. Am I getting this right, Jaff?
Yeah, yep.
What we tend to do is we do things very in time. So if you can imagine, say, an ambulance attending an emergency, the last thing that the people who are victims of that emergency want is for the ambulance paramedics to be thinking about what they're going to do tomorrow. They need to be here and now. They need to be dealing with the situation as it arrives.
Yeah.
And again, linking it to that idea of fight, flight, freeze, we want them to be fighting for us. Okay. So a politician who is faced with a pandemic, that's a crisis. That's an in time thing to sort out. The difference between them, of course, is that, well, if it's a paramedic at the scene of an accident, then the time in which you have to be focused is limited. It's about attending the injuries, getting them to hospital, and then moving on. This is going to go on for at least, maybe 18 months, perhaps 2 years, before an effective vaccine is found, and before we can start getting back to what we used to call normal life. It's a long time to be doing in time. And so what our politicians have to try and balance, I guess, and I'm not making any apologies for cock-ups, blunders, mistakes, etc. What they have to be doing is trying to deal with a crisis in a through time way, which is quite hard to do. And
sorry, Steve. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, it kind of, in my mind, it starts to explain a little bit how messages keep changing, because you respond to things like maybe scientific evidence. So, for example, in Blackburn, so the R number is going up. It is in in Lancashire as well at the moment. So the R number is going up and up and up. So we need to plan to bring it down again, which is a through time activity. In the meantime, there are still people who are getting infected, getting hospitalized, and some of them are dying. So we have to deal with that. So that it's trying to find that balance between what's going to happen in a few months, perhaps a year's time, with dealing with a crisis here and now. You need to be a very special person to be able to do that simultaneously, I think.
And I think you're so right there. So for me, like I said, when we were having this conversation yesterday, it is, we are not condoning the actions of politicians. What we're doing is, as NLPers, is putting some frames around perhaps that behavior. And again, I go back to the meaning of the communication is the response you get. Unfortunately, politicians seem to be sending sending communication with a particular meaning, and well, the response that they're getting is also pretty similar to what they perhaps what people thought that meaning to be. And I think it goes back to, so there's a couple of other presuppositions about all behavior as a positive intention. So deep down within me, Steve, deep down within me, I believe that an overwhelming majority of people, including a number of politicians, do things for good intent, for having a good, because of a good reason. And it is tricksy when you live in a world like we're living in right now to be able to put a frame like that on, when, like you said, perhaps messages are being changed so frequently and people are going, what the blooming heck is going on here? I am just so confused now. I don't know what I can do and what I can't do.
Yeah.
And like I said, when we started thinking about it, we thought, well, yeah, what people are trying to do at the minute, and I don't often like using that word trying, but I genuinely feel that's what they're doing. What they're trying to do at the minute is plan for the future, like you said, in the best way possible, because we don't know what the future holds. You know, you said it could be 18 months. Yesterday I was saying, well, it could be 6 months and it could all be over. Likewise, it could be 36 months and it could be all over.
Yep.
So we're all going, we have no idea of what this future holds for us, at least the short-term future. And at the same time, we're going through this wave of up and down, up and down. Some areas have kind of got a spike, others areas have dropped it. And yes, the messaging could be better. It could be clearer.
Oh,
It could be
absolutely.
more efficient. It could be more streamlined. And at the same time, we go back to a couple of episodes ago where we talked about what are we in control of and what are we not in control of. And more importantly, how do we put focus on what are we in control of? And at this minute in time, what we are in control of is ourselves.
Yeah,
Whilst we want the
absolutely.
messaging to be more streamlined, whilst we want the messaging to be better and clearer and more effective, well, we're not in control of that,
No.
because, well, a lot of us aren't in control of that. There are people who perhaps are watching this and work within Whitehall who go, actually, we get that, and perhaps we need to be putting
Hi,
stuff out
Boris.
there. Well, genuinely, Steve, I think for me, it's I've got a couple of friends on Facebook who I know work within the Department for Health and Social Care, and hopefully, you know, if they do get around to watching this, then perhaps they may have that sway to be able to make some of those decisions to go, yeah, actually, we perhaps just need to be a bit more clearer on our messaging. Because I think that's what it boils down to for me, Steve, is that I think that what people are currently doing, what our decision makers are currently doing, is acting from a place of good intent, in Jaffer's world anyway, and B, are dealing with a crisis the likes of which we've never seen and hopefully we'll never see again, and having to balance, how do we plan for this long term? So how do we do that through time stuff? And, you know, learn from the past and think about all that kind of stuff. Well, you can't learn from the past because the last time this happened, and again, we talked about this a few sessions ago, the last time something similar like this happened was in 1920. And even then, similar is probably a stretch of the word, because it was very, very different to what happened. So there are no lessons from the past that we can learn from. We're trying to plan for a future in which the present consistently and constantly fluctuates. And so to balance, like you said, those two in time with through time preferences is quite a challenge in itself. And it's quite a
Sure
challenge.
is,
And
isn't
so
it?
for me, it's about actually all you need to do, politicians or whoever, government, is to make some of those messages clearer and more
Come and talk to
effective.
me in Jaff.
You should. You should. We'll might charge you a little bit because I'm aware that the government has a little bit of money to spend, but not a lot. We're Lancashire folk, aren't we, Steve? We don't want lots. We just
Yeah,
want enough to get by.
that's right. That'll do us.
This whole thing
Well,
about time, though, is ever so interesting for me because, like I said, as someone who's got quite a strong through time preference, um, it's just, yeah. I said this a few weeks ago with Sarah Bishop, is that the last 6 months have very much been somewhat of a blur to me. So I can remember the first couple of months of the year. From around March onwards, it's all kind of blurred into one big blob, really. It's a nice blob. It's a multicolored blob. So I know that there's lots of positive things that have happened. And there's been a few times where I felt a bit challenged and unsure and unfamiliar. So it's a nice blob, but it just feels like a blob, which for me was quite challenging at times.
yeah.
Not being able to remember, oh, what happened in August is a classic example. My gosh, Steve, I have no idea what happened to August at all. Bless. It just seemed to fly by.
Yeah, it went quickly, didn't it? So,
Wow.
so just thinking about how we respond emotionally to all that as well. Um, so here's a question for you, because you do through time. If you had somebody, if you say you were working with somebody with a very strong in time preference, say, do you reckon? And if you're out there and this is you, let me know, because I'm dead curious, because I do a mixture of both, really. I don't have a strong preference either way, I don't think. But if you have a really strong in-time preference, then how do you do time-based emotions? So, for example, can you do real strong in time and still be hopeful? Because hope is about something that happens in the future.
Yeah.
Or can you be very strongly in time and not feel regret or guilt? I don't know.
So I know, as I
Nostalgia.
know, as a strong, with someone who's got quite a strong through time preference, that absolutely, yeah. And we know that would be typical. So
Yeah.
through time is typically
Yeah.
would feel those future-based emotions, like you said, of whether it's hope or whether it's anxiety or whether it's concern or whatever it is, whether it's excitement about an upcoming event. And I can also feel a little bit down and a little bit upset, or remember a fantastic experience from the past and really associate back into it. Really associate back into it. And yeah, we were having this discussion yesterday. So if there are any in-timers listening out there, people who have an in-time preference, then please do let us know, because I'm quite interested to know, yeah, can you have that sense of that really strong feeling of whatever emotion it is that might be future based and also past based.
Yeah. I'm sure you can, because I mean, like, everybody switches.
Yeah.
Even the person with the strongest. I'm just wondering, yeah, how do they do it? How do they process it? Like hope or regret or guilt or, yeah, nostalgia? Yeah.
So we've had some comments coming through, which is great. We didn't have any comments last week, and that was probably because Muggins here didn't set it up properly. So, but we've got Tony and Max listening in. Welcome, guys. Oh, hey.
Hi,
It's our
Tony. Hi,
regulars.
Max.
It's our regulars, Steve.
Happy
It's
Friday.
happy Friday to you both. Tony said, a response to a pandemic is in time, but when you understand that there was an in-time warning some years ago which was ignored, it becomes political.
Yeah. No, I can see that.
And I think for me, it absolutely becomes political, and I then just need to bring myself back to what control or influence do I have over this situation.
Yeah.
And you exemplified it so beautifully a few weeks ago, Steve, where you said, actually, well, I wrote to my MP and I said, did you know this was going to happen? And this is the proof to say that this was going to happen. And that's not to say, well, why haven't you done anything about it? But it's to put it on their radar. Should an event like this occur in the future, should people need to be made aware of, actually, yeah, those warnings were out there. And then Tony followed that up with, of course, I may have this the wrong way around.
Who knows?
Yeah, is the thing. So yeah, I've lost my train of thought, Steve.
That's okay. You're going to tell us what Max had said.
So Max, I just said, I've only just joined whilst doing my lesson planning. Bless her. So I think she has us in the background. She's another one who likes to call us the Jaff and Steve show.
Cheers, Maxie. Yeah, I got sorry, I was doing a bit of through time from the past, and while we're on the comments and stuff, so please keep sending in comments, questions, anything that you think that you'd like us to discuss from a sort of, how do we apply NLP to what's happening around us in our daily lives. Please get in touch and do that. Two things that just while they're in my head, I'm going to say them anyway. Just a couple of things to pick up from the last couple of sessions. In 2 weeks ago, I think it was, I mentioned the 3 Ps.
Yes, yep.
People have a problem or a crisis or an issue or a challenge or whatever it is. The things that I try and watch out for are, do they take it personally? That's the first P. Is it permanent? In other words, is this going to go on forever? And is it, what's the third P? It's the bit where it spreads to other parts of your life. Pervasive.
Yep.
So is it personal, pervasive, permanent? And if you're ticking all those boxes, then that could lead to things like depression, burnout, all that kind of stuff. Mental illness, basically. So I was trying to remember where I'd find it, and I looked it up yesterday, and it was in a book by an amazing guy called Martin Seligman. I don't know if anybody's ever heard of Martin Seligman. He used to be the head of the American Psychological Society, and he had a long career as a clinical psychologist. And the way he tells it is, well, one day he kind of woke up and realized that psychology had only been doing half a job.
Yeah.
That job had been finding out why people didn't cope, basically. And he looked around and he thought, well, hang on, most people live in a world of, let's say, poo, and yet they cope. How do they do that? So he devoted his not inconsiderable resources and his brain power to the idea of something called positive psychology. In other words, despite stuff that happens to us, most people function really well for most of the time. He's written loads of stuff about it. And one of the books the first book of his that I read was something called Authentic Happiness. And the 3 Ps lurk in the pages of Authentic Happiness, which I cannot recommend highly enough. If I was being cast away on my desert island, that would be on my short list. Wow. So that was the first thing. The second thing, last week I was talking about an amazing Italian trainer, Carmina Falangi. So I've done quite a bit of work with Carmina in the past and hope to work with him again in the future, Brexit permitting. But one of the things that he does is, I said last week he was a stand-up comedian as well as a trainer and a youth worker. His comedy is based on stories. Yeah. And at the moment on his Facebook page, which is called Everything But the Cat, Everything But the Cat, he's running a little training course called The Art and Science of Storytelling. And I haven't done it myself, but I'm going to sign up for it. And knowing Carmina, I can't recommend it highly enough. It'd be brilliant. So if you get a chance, have a look at that. I think you have to pay for it, but Carmina is very reasonable about that. And it will be quite an experience. So
I'm just gonna find that group now as you're talking, Steve. So everything.
It's called Everything But the Cat.
But the Cat.
And his name is Carmina.
I've heard so much. I've heard so much about Carmina. So
his name is spelled Carmine, and his Facebook page is he's got a personal. Well, it's not a personal page; it's a business page as well. It's called it's Carmina Roddy, which is RHODI. So it's Carmina Roddy.
I can't seem to find it right now, but that's probably because, my Facebook seems to be playing up at the minute. But that sounds really, really interesting. And I think, one of the things that we want to do through sharing this podcast is to make people aware of other things that are out there, other things that they connect to, and other things that, because whilst me and you talk about the wonderful world of NLP and what an impact it has has had on our lives and on the lives of people that we know, actually there's very similar yet different stuff out there as well that we can recommend highly enough. So thanks for the book recommendations. And again, I've heard so much about Carmina, and I think great, I hope a bit like you to be able to see him Brexit permitting and attending a couple of his training courses, because they seem to be just fab, just amazing stuff.
Yeah. Good.
So we're coming on to 11:30. I'm aware that we started a little bit late, but I think the naturally has kind of naturally come to a close anyway. Can I thank everyone, as always, for tuning in? Steve, you won't be here next week.
I won't. No, we started doing some training again.
Woohoo, which is great.
Yeah. So if you know of anybody in Yorkshire who might want to do Yorkshire, an NLP Foundation diploma, myself and another great colleague, Julia Lee, we're starting one on Thursday.
Fabulous.
So get in touch if you're interested. It would be lovely to have a few more bums on seats.
So if
And
anyone knows,
socially distant and, well, as COVID safe as we can be. And my little friend Martha is here now to say hello.
oh, well, no one's ever seen Martha. There you are. That is lovely,
Look,
Martha.
she seems to be enjoying the sunshine.
She seems to be absolutely loving it, Steve. She's just thinking, this is a great place to be. This is a great place
Yep.
to be. So,
Don't
like
tell me
Steve said, if anyone does know anyone in the good old area of Yorkshire, I was about to say good old state, and then I realised, bloody hell, that's the United States, isn't it? The good old region, that was the word that I was looking for. Good old region of Yorkshire, who would like to do a foundation diploma, then again, you can contact Steve through Facebook. Or if you can't find Steve, just drop me a message and I'll let Steve know. So happy to be the conduit between people. But yeah, you won't be here next week. I am still hoping to be here next week with a very special co-host, TBC, to be confirmed. And then if I can't find a co-host, or if one of you lovely people fancy co-hosting with me, then do let me know. It could be quite the interesting experience for us all. So I am still hoping to be here next week with someone, and we'll see who that will be. So please do tune back in next week. All that's left for me to say is hope you have a lovely weekend. And Steve, do you want to finish us off?
Yeah, thanks very much, everybody. Have a great weekend, and I hope to see you in a couple of weeks' time. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot. See you later.
Bye, folks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.